let's shift gears over to the semiconductor space. There's a big hearing that kicked off about an hour ago in the Senate Commerce Committee as the CEOs of some big chip makers stopped by to chat about the U.S. infrastructure for chip making. Here with more is Yahoo Finance's Dan Howley with the updates. Again, Dan, only about an hour into the hearing, which means we're probably still in opening remarks. What's the update on that front?
That's right, Brian and Kiko. Basically, what we're seeing is some of the heads of the chip companies testifying about the CHIPS Act and the need to further fund research and development, as well as foundries within the U.S. to bring the U.S. back into the position where a majority of chips that it uses are built here. We've seen, obviously, the supply chain issues throughout the pandemic, and now the further issue with the lack of neon gas. Or potential lack of neon gas coming out of Ukraine because of the war there. So we have Pat Gelsinger, the CEO of Intel, as well as Sanjay Mehrotra. He is the CEO of Micron. And this is what Pat Gelsinger had to say about the need for these chips.
Senators, we must look beyond short-term capacity and recognize what U.S. chip leadership truly entails with 4 areas of focus. Incentivize manufacturing on U.S. soil. Second, supercharge research and development. Third, address the skills gap. And fourth, enhance our national defense.
So obviously, this is something that goes just beyond, a need for getting more cars on the road, although that obviously one of the areas that's been impacted. It goes to every facet of the economy, including healthcare and national defense. Pat Gelsinger there really discussing this with the senators. And it seems as though they're all on board. They just need to get more signatures in the full Senate outside of this committee.
Yeah, Dan, it's been interesting to see how Pat Gelsinger has kind of become the face for the administration in addressing all things with chips. But I know you also had a chance to speak with NVIDIA's Jensen Huang, who, of course, is one of the biggest chip makers. What is he saying about what the government needs to potentially incentivize more manufacturing back home?
Yeah, essentially what he's talking about is, they obviously don't manufacture here. They use TSMC as one of their main fabs. So they don't have any plants here in the U.S. They are more about that R&D. And that's something that NVIDIA has been doing for years and doing well as far as building out the U.S.'s AI capabilities and working with the U.S. government on things along those lines. And, we got to speak with Jensen, obviously, Julie Hyman, as well as me, going back and forth about how they had this new Grace CPU, as well as their new Hopper GPU design from their GTC conference, and then just discussing things outside of that, including how the company is diving deeper into the automotive industry and saying that though it only makes about $588 million in revenue a year right now, they have a pipeline of more than $11 billion set up, including working with Range Rover Jaguar and Lucid Motors, as well as China's BYD.
Dan, and lastly here, I just kind of want to ask about the broad infrastructure narrative here, right? Because we know that a lot of these chip makers have been talking a lot with fair frequency about whether or not there needs to be more money, not just put into the chip space, but in the broad tech manufacturing space. Is that something that Democrats specifically in the Senate Commerce Committee, knowing that the Biden administration is still prioritizing this, is trying to drive home in terms of points?
I think it's both sides, really. It's a weirdly bipartisan issue, I think, here. And that's really why you're seeing that kind of support on both sides of the aisle, is that, the chip industry used to be dominant here in the U.S., no longer is. The majority of the chips the U.S. uses come from Taiwan now. And, with obviously kind of the saber rattling that we're seeing as far as China and Taiwan goes, as a result of Russia's move on Ukraine, we're seeing more warships float between the two countries. I do think that both sides of the aisle recognize that this is something that needs to be done. And, Intel obviously making that huge investment in Ohio. We're seeing Samsung move into the U.S. And Micron building out more facilities. So hopefully we start to see more movement in that space and we start to see this kind of legislation get passed.